Mic check 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Can anybody hear me in the chat? Kenny P, what's up? Please hit the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. This is Geopolitics episode 258. Complex Design, what's going on, dude? Also, docket and description beneath the video for you to follow along with. Quick housekeeping. We had a great open chat last night. Open chat number 12. Amazing. Had a lot of viewers, a lot of thumbs up, a lot of feedback as well. And if you have not checked it out, you got to check it out. It was probably one of the dopest open chats we've had so far. Terrence Forrest, what's going on, fam? The original old man, what's going on, fam? So yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback, positive feedback. We did have a lot of trolls last night, so that's the first time I've ever seen that many trolls. They say that usually when you have that many trolls come in, that means your channel's doing well. So the Black Brain Trust is definitely in a comfortable position right now. When we first started the channel, we thought we were only going to have about 200 subscribers, 250 subscribers, and then slowly but surely we hit 1,000. So we've reached our goal. We've exceeded our goal as to what we want the channel to be, the platform to be. Next steps for next year, man, for 2020, man, we just gonna we got some stuff cooking that's gonna separate this channel, this platform from the rest of what you see in the Black manosphere. Yeah, these guys got four-cylinder, Hondas with big coffee can exhaust systems on it. We got that Hellcat, that demon with the red eyes, with the red headlights on it, and that Hemi shaking. So we making it do what it do. We making it shake over here. So can't say that about a lot of other channels, especially after I just heard a few minutes ago on another channel. I won't mention the name of it. You got a lot of weirdos over there, so I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, we talk about self-improvement. Definitely talk about that last night. Yeah, we were putting in work last night, man. It got 1.3 thousand views last night, so or today overall. So hey, salute to Unreasonable Man as well. Brother Truth Be Told, what up, fam? Yeah, it comes with the territory. There's nothing we can really do about it. I mean, we could isolate ourselves even more, but then we'll end up like the Cubans, or maybe like North Korea. My here, why Israel? What's going on? We got 25 people watching, only 16 likes. Hit the like button if you are not going to participate in the chat, please. Yeah, hit that notification bell to get all the updates, man. We got some stuff coming that you're gonna like. But once August 1st comes, a lot of those would be supposed to be allegedly content creators will no longer be on YouTube. We won't have to worry about them anymore. It's time to build together as black men. Brother Truth Be Told says, yeah, we've been trying to do that on here since day one. Oh, she's simply unique. Hello to you. Welcome. Trick Lessons Podcast. Welcome. Yeah, just got finished working out, man. Hit back and shoulders again for the week. It's my second time. I think today will probably be the last day of hitting back and shoulders. And then, you know, fire up this hangout. Then we'll just get it cracking, man. Yeah, Google Hangouts has run at the end of life. It was what they call EOL, end of life. So as Google moves away from Android and moves into the new operating system, a new version of a new version of Google Communications will come out. And you'll see a different sort of application replace Google Hangouts. They really don't need Google Hangouts. That's just the way you know Google works. You have to keep in mind that YouTube and Google are two separate companies from a development standpoint. YouTube can function just fine without Hangouts, so they don't really need it. All right, let me start with the first article. U.S. removes Turkey from F-35 fighter jet program. BBC.com. All right, let me just get it cracking right here. The U.S. says the F-35 cannot coexist with a Russian intelligence collection platform that will be used to learn about its advanced capabilities. Russia began delivering its advanced S-400 system to Turkey last week. Turkey and the U.S. are key NATO allies, but Ankara has also been establishing closer links with Russia. Turkey has so far not publicly reacted to the latest U.S. move, which was widely expected. In a statement on Wednesday, White House spokesman or spokeswoman Stephanie Grissom said, "Unfortunately, Turkey's decision to purchase Russian S-400 air defense system renders it continued involvement with the F-35 impossible. The United States has been actively working with Turkey to provide air defense solutions to meet its legitimate air defense needs. And this administration has made multiple offers to move Turkey to the front of the line to receive the U.S. Patriot air defense system. Turkey has been a longstanding and trusted partner with NATO, with trusted partner and NATO ally for over 65 years, but accepting the S-400 undermines the commitments all NATO allies made to each other to move away from Russian systems. At the same time, Ms. Grissom stressed that the United States will still greatly values our strategic relationship with Turkey. As NATO allies, our relationship is multi-layered and not solely focused on F-35, she said. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan believed that President Trump would ultimately allow him to have both the Russian S-400 missile system and the F-35 U.S. warplanes, but he was wrong. Could things get worse? Will Turkey's suspension from the F-35 program be followed up by other measures? The 2017 Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act mandates action against any country making significant purchases from the Russian defense industry. The big question now is how much damage will this do to bilateral ties between Washington and Ankara, and more broadly between Turkey and NATO? There is already a sense in the alliance that Turkey is drifting away from the West, flirting with Russia and pursuing a kind of authoritarian democracy at odds with liberal values. So is this a temporary shift in Ankara's outlook or a more significant turning point in Turkey's foreign policy? Turkey has signed up to buy in 100 F-35s, America's most sophisticated warplanes, and had invested heavily in the U.S. program. Turkish companies produce 937 of the plane's parts. But Turkey has also pursued an increasingly independent defense policy amidst strained ties with the U.S. and Europe. It had purchased Russia's advanced S-400 air defense system for $2.5 billion and sent members of its armed forces to Russia for training. Turkey had also argued that the U.S. was slow to offer an alternative missile defense shield. U.S. defense officials U.S. defense officials say the S-400 is incompatible with the wider NATO air defense system in the region. They say they do not want F-35s to be near S-400s because they fear Russian technicians will be able to assess the warplane's vulnerabilities. Turkey has the second largest army in NATO, a 29-member military alliance. It is one of the U.S.'s key allies and is located in a strategic position sharing borders with Syria, Iraq, and Iran. It has also played an important role in the Syrian conflict, provided arms and military support to some rebel groups. However, it has seen relations deteriorate with some NATO members and the EU, who have accused Mr. Erdogan of adopting an increasingly authoritarian style following a failed coup in 2016. So this is a graph, or I should say a graphic demonstration of how the S-400 missile defense system actually works. So it has four pieces to it. It has the long-range surveillance radar. It has the command vehicle, command and control. And then you have an engagement radar. And then you have a launch vehicle. So the launch vehicle is where the missiles fire from. But the engagement radar and the long-range surveillance radar are what look at the latitude and altitude, or I should say longitude. So there's a up and down axis that it looks at, and then it's a horizontal axis that it looks at, vertical axis versus horizontal. Long-range surveillance radar tracks objects and relays information to command vehicle, which assesses potential targets. Target is identified and command vehicle orders missile launch. Launch data are sent to best best place launch vehicle and its releases surface-to-air missiles. Engagement radar helps keep missiles towards target. So once the missile leaves, the guidance actually comes from the engagement radar, which is a very unique system. Most of the time, you have a missile system; it's all tied in one sort of battery. You may have two pieces to a battery, but it's for all intents and purposes, it's never more than two or three pieces. In this regard, this is a high-powered system that can see all the way up to like 250 miles. So to give you a scale, a rough scale, 250 miles would be like between Boston and New York City. So it can see that whole entire region, from Albany down to NYC, through Connecticut, New Jersey, back up to Boston. That's how wide that system is, and that's how much it can cover and shoot down. So my take on this is that I suspect that Israel has a hand in this, and the reason being is this: if Israel wants to clear out Syria, and that Turkish S-400 air defense system can penetrate all into Syria, it can shoot down any of those Israeli planes. That's not something that Israel wants. Israel wants complete, total air superiority over everything in the Middle East. United States wanted to sell this Patriot missile battery to Turkey, but Turkey knows that that's a weak system in comparison to what the S-400 is. They paid $2.5 billion for the S-400, but it's also cheaper than the Patriot missile battery. I think the Patriot missile battery is like $4 or $5 billion, which is ridiculous. So I suspect, this is just me personally thinking out loud, I suspect that that Israel is playing a strong role in this, as to making sure that Turkey does not get its F-35 planes. Because why else would Turkey produce so many parts for it and have such a heavy hand in investment into the F-35 if if they thought that they would be compromised in terms of acquisition of the planes? I mean, you ordered 100 planes. Why wouldn't you want your planes? I mean, you went into this knowing. I'm saying, you being Turkey, you went into this knowing that there's a probability that if I buy this S-400 missile system, I'm saying I being President Erdogan, if I buy this system, there's a probability that I may not get the planes that I want. So why not wait for my planes to be finished first and then get the S-400 missile system? But I suspect Israel is saying they can't have both. They just cannot have both because Russia already has S-400 missile air defense system inside Khamenei Air Base, which is let me pull up a map so you guys can understand what I'm talking about. Give me a second. Let me just pull up this map. All right, here's a good map right here. What the Hey, we got 40 people watching and only 28 likes. If you're not going to participate in the chat, please hit the like button. All right, here's the map right here. And this is a map of all the air bases that Russia and Syrian military share. Let me see if you guys can actually. So what you're looking at right here is Latakia, is the province, and then you have the Kamini Air Base, and then you have Tartus, which is the naval port. This S-400 air defense system covers everything from Idlib, Aleppo, all the way into Hama and Homs. So it covers this whole entire region here. Turkey, however, their air defense, the same S-400 air defense system would cover all of Turkey, including the northern part of Syria here. So Aleppo, Raqqa, and possibly Deir ez-Zor, as well as the Kurdish region here, which is the darker shaded area here. So it would cover all of this here, and you would still cover all. Russia would still cover all of the western to central part of Syria, which means if Israeli warplanes want to come into Syria to run a bombing raid, they would not be able to get those jets through the radar system that the S-400s has. They would spot them from a mile away, or from miles away, for that matter. So they would never be able to penetrate into Syrian territory. This is my theory. This is my perspective. I'm not saying this is the actual truth. I'm saying based on the technical analysis that the S-400s are, and just based on what it can do, they would shoot down all of Israeli fighter jets and American fighter jets too. If Turkey needed to, they would probably think, if Turkey wants to have a sphere of influence into Syria, they can't do that if Israel is in there bombing it up. They can't do that if Israel has air superiority over the region. So they would need an S-400 system to actually take down those F-35 fighter jets. I mean, who else would have their F-35 fighter jets flying in that part of the region other than Israel? Unless you want to include Greece. I don't even know if Greece is a part of the program. I know they're part of NATO, but I don't know if they're part of the program. So what I'm saying here is, overall, I think the biggest threat that they're looking at is, if not the United States government, United States military, it would probably be Israel. Israel is the only country in the region that has F-35 fighter jets, and they've actually used them in Syria last year. I think they've grounded them since, but because I believe one of them had, or I think all of them have been grounded because of fuel issues and ejection issues on the for the pilots. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this one is from Reuters.com. This is a supplement to the previous article. Turkey will retaliate if U.S. imposes sanctions over S-400s. Minister. Turkey would retaliate against what it called an unacceptable threat of U.S. sanctions over Ankara's purchase of Russian S-400 missile defenses. Its foreign minister said on Monday, adding he thinks President Donald Trump wants to avoid such measures. Turkey began receiving deliveries of the surface-to-air S-400 system earlier this month, prompting the United States to begin removing the NATO ally from its F-35 system fighter program over security concerns. Washington says it is concerned that the S-400 software will compromise its F-35s to the benefit of Russia. While several Republican and Democratic U.S. lawmakers have pressed for sanctions, Trump has equivocated in recent days. If the United States portrays an adversarial attitude towards us, we will take retaliatory measures, as we've told them. This is not a threat or a bluff. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said in an interview with broadcaster TGRT Haber. "We're not a country that will bow down to those who show animosity towards Turkey," he said, reiterating a threat of retaliation that Turkey made last month. Melvut added that he did not expect the U.S. administration to take such action. Trump does not want to impose sanctions on Turkey, and he frequently says that his administration and the previous U.S. administration is also responsible for Turkey not being able to buy Patriot systems. This is true, Melvut said. The United States announced last week it was beginning the process of removing Turkey from the program for the F-35 stealth jets, the most advanced aircraft in the U.S. arsenal, which is used by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and other partner countries. Turkey, like some other NATO partners, was part of the manufacturing supply chain for the aircraft, producing some 900 parts, and Turkish defense companies are set to lose work worth billions of dollars. A U.S. official said it would cost some $500 million to $600 million to shift F-35 manufacturing from Turkey. The delivery of the S-400 components is ongoing, with 14 shipments of related equipment having landed in Turkey over the last 9 days. Deliveries are set to continue through April 2020. Separately, Sergei Chesnozov, head of Russia's Rostec state conglomerate, said that Russia and Turkey were in talks about the possibility of jointly manufacturing some components of the S-400 system in Turkey. Moscow and Ankara are holding consultations in the area of licensed production of the S-400 air defense system components parts. Turkey state-run Anadolu news agency quoted Chemezov as saying, "Besides, Turkey is interested in the latest Russian combat modules, air defense systems, and various ranges, as well as anti-tank systems. Negotiations are underway for Russia to help the Republic of Turkey in creating its national air defense and long-range missile defense system," he said. Chemezov added that Moscow was ready for various formats of technological cooperation, including in such high-tech areas as the aerospace industry, helicopter construction, and energy. This is interesting because they mention anti-tank systems. Now, why would you need anti-tank systems if you're Turkey? Who are you going to engage from a land warfare perspective if you're Turkey? Who are you planning on engaging outside of Syria? Syria doesn't have that many tanks to begin with, so whatever tanks they have are very crepit and old, very very much antiquated tanks. I think they still are using T-55s for the majority of their inventory. T-55 tanks came out in the 1960s or 1950s for that matter, late 1950s, early 1960s. Those tanks are probably 60 years old at best. Why anybody would need? Why would Turkey really need anti-tank systems if they're not going to get into a land war? If they don't expect to be involved in a land warfare campaign? It's very interesting to think about. All right, let me move on to the next article. All right, next article is from CNN.com. Iran announces capture of British flag oil tanker. U.S. officials say two ships seized. Iran has Iran announced the capture of one British flag ship in the narrow Strait of Hormuz on Friday. U.S. officials said that a second had also been seized. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps (IRGC) said that its navy had captured the British flag oil tanker Stena Imperial, according to Iran's state-run Press TV. The IRGC accused the tanker of violating international regulations to Press TV. The Stena Imperial had turned off its tracker and ignored warnings. Press TV also reported, citing Iranian military sources, U.S. defense officials confirmed that the tanker had been seized. Later in the day, U.S. officials told CNN another ship, the Liberian flagged MV Mestar tanker, had also been seized by Iran on Friday. But Iranian military officials denied that Mestar had been seized, Press TV reported, citing informed military sources. The ship was shortly stopped and briefed by Iranian authorities on maritime security and harmless navigation, Press TV said. Mestar manager Norfolk Shipping UK confirmed in a statement that the ship had been released. Communication has been reestablished with the vessel, and Master confirmed that the armed guards have left the vessel is have left, and the vessel is free to continue the voyage. Norfolk Shipping said all crew are safe and well. On Friday evening, the Mestar on Friday evening, the Mestar was seen headed in a western direction into the Gulf instead of north to Iran, according to MarineTraffic.com tracking data. Senator Imperial was headed to Saudi Arabia's port of Al Jubail from the UAE port of Fujairah when it was seized by the IRGC, the semi-official Fars news agency reported, citing a statement from IRGC. The statement said the ship was making an entry from the exit point of the Strait of Hormuz in the south, disregarding the established procedures that require all entries be made through the northern pass, Fars reported, adding that the ship has been escorted to Iranian coastal waters for further legal procedures and investigations. According to a statement by the Stena Imperial's owner, Stena Bulk, and operator, Northern Marine Management, the ship is Swedish owned and there are 23 seafarers on board of Indian, Russian, Latvian, and Filipino nationality. The Stena Imperial was first approached by unidentified small crafts and a helicopter during transit of the Strait of Hormuz, while the vessel in international waters at approximately 4 p.m. local time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the company said. So my perspective on this is that I question the legitimacy as to why it was going from Saudi Arabia to the UAE and back and forth. What value does that really serve? Um, both of these countries have energy as an export product, but why would it need to go from the UAE to Saudi Arabia? Very weird, not making a lot of sense to me. I'm not really feeling, the story altogether. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But they got it anyways, and the British don't have the maritime operations to keep up with such a situation. All these British, I think they have 50 British tankers and ships that float in and out of the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. The British doesn't have enough tanks. Not tanks. The British doesn't have enough ships, frigates and destroyers and stuff like that, anti-piracy shit. They don't have enough of that to keep up with that sort of demand. Because you put that many ships in the Gulf, something's bound to happen. Somebody's going to bump into something or someone, and shots are going to get fired, and that's all it takes. All it takes is a few rounds from a you know, from a naval gun to be fired off. Whether it's 50 caliber or just a M4 rifle. Yeah, Andy, I agree with you. I agree with you. That's where I was going. That's where I was going with this. I think it was probably a spy ship. I think they're using it to navigate, to monitor, to navigate certain areas of the Persian Gulf to kind of figure out what's what in terms of the navigation path. That's a good point, Andy. All right, let me get to this next article. Next article from Futurism. See if I can expand this out. Yeah. In June, Iran's military shot down one of the U.S. Navy's $130 million Global Hawk drones, claimed it had veered out of international airspace and into the nation's territory. Now, the U.S. Navy has returned the favor using a new directed energy weapon to disable an Iranian drone in the same region, marking the next generation device first known kill. According to the Department of Defense statement, a fixed wing drone approached the USS Boxer while the ship traveled through the Strait of Hormuz on July 18th. The drone then came within a threatening range, prompting the crew to take defensive action. A defense official later told military.com on the condition of the anonymity that the Navy took out the drone using its Light Marine Air Defense Integrated System, LMADIS, a device that uses radio frequencies to jam drones. Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mohammad Javad Zarif, meanwhile has denied the incident altogether, telling reporters that the nation has no information about losing a drone. That's funny that they're advertising a toy drone right here. Interesting. With drones becoming cheaper and more capable, the U.S. military has been investing heavily in anti-drone tech in recent years. However, while many of those systems involve literally shooting down drones, Lamatis essentially uses energy to render a drone useless. That makes it a far cheaper countermeasure to a drone attack than, say, shooting a threatening device with a missile. Meaning the first directed energy drone kill might just be the first of many. So the Lamatis weapon is basically a Nintendo Super Scope 6. It looks just like a Super Scope 6, but it has a direct energy component to it that just basically points at whatever it sees within its radar crosshairs and just takes it out. Um, I suspect that the next iteration of drones are going to be able to counter that anti-radiation capabilities, whether it's using some kind of material on the outside of the drone or paint that can absorb that sort of energy, that sort of deal. Titanium, um, chromoly, or something like that that they'll use to counter that sort of positive energy coming to it and make it null and void. All right, let me get to this next article here. This one is from AlJazeera.com. Op-ed. Israel scramble for Africa, selling water, weapons, and lies. Israel is trying to rewrite history to tap into the hearts of ordinary Africans, but it will not succeed. Let me expand this out. For years, Kenya has served as Israel's gateway to Africa. Israel has been using the strong political, economic, and security relations between the two states as a way to expand its influence on the continent and turn other African nations against Palestine. Unfortunately, Israel's strategy seems, at least on the surface, to be succeeding. Africa's historically vocal support for the Palestinian struggle on the international arena is dwindling. The continent's rapprochement with Israel is unfortunate because for decades Africa has stood as a vanguard against all racist ideologies, including Zionism. The ideology behind Israel's establishment on the ruins of Palestine, if Africa succumbs to Israel's Israeli enticement and pressure to fully embrace the Zionist state, the Palestinian people would lose a treasured partner in their struggle for the freedom and human rights. But all is not lost. Last month, I visited Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, to partake in discussions with the country's journalists, intellectuals, human rights activists, and ordinary citizens in an effort to counter some of the propaganda inflicted by Israel's Hasbara machine in recent years, keeping Israel's success in penetrating various layers of the Kenyan society in mind. I also wanted to explore whether there is still some potential for solidarity. I was pleasantly surprised at the end of my visit as I discovered that Israel's success story in Kenya and the rest of Africa is a superficial one, and the affinity between Africa and Palestine is far too deep for any charm offensive by Israel to easily eradicate. According to Israeli political analysts Pinas and Bari, Israel's charm offensive in Africa started after Israel failed to convince European states to support its policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians. When Europe openly expressed its support for the establishment of a Palestinian state, Embarra said, Israel made a strategic decision to focus on Africa. But the EU support for a Palestinian state and occasional criticism of the illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied territories was not the only reason behind Israel's decision to turn its face towards Africa. Most African countries, like most countries in the global south, have long been voting in favor of pro-Palestinian resolutions at the United Nations General Assembly, further contributing to Israel's sense of isolation on the international stage. As a result, winning back Africa became a modus operandi in Israeli international affairs. Winning back because Africa has not always been hostile to Israel and Zionism. Ghana officially recognized Israel in 1956, just 8 years after its inception, and started a trend that continued amongst African countries for years to come. By the early 1970s, Israel has established a strong position for itself on the continent. On the eve of the 1973 Israeli-Arab War, Israel had full diplomatic ties with 33 African countries. The October War, however, changed all of that. Back then, Arab countries under Egyptian leadership functioned to some extent with a unified political strategy. And when African countries had to choose between Israel and a country born out of Western colonial intrigues, and the Arabs who suffered at the hands of Western colonialism as much as Africa did, they naturally chose the Arab side. One after the other, African countries began severing ties with Israel. Soon enough, no African state other than Malawi, Lesotho, and Swaziland had official diplomatic relations with Israel. Then the continent's solidarity with Palestine went even further. The Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union, in its 12th ordinary session held in Kampala in 1975, became the first international body to recognize on a large scale the inherent racism in Israel's Zionist ideology by adopting Resolution 77. That the very resolution was cited in UNGA, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, adopted in November for that same year, which determined that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. Resolution 3379 remained in effect until it was revoked by the Assembly under intense American pressure in 1991. Regrettably, Africa's solidarity with Palestine started to erode in the 1990s. It was in those years that the U.S.-sponsored peace process gained serious momentum, becoming the Oslo Accords and other agreements that normalized the Israeli occupation without giving Palestinians their basic human rights. With many meetings and handshakes between beaming Israeli and Palestinian officials featuring regularly in news media, many African nations bought into the illusion that a lasting peace was finally at hand. By the late 1990s, Israel had reactivated its ties with a whopping 39 African countries. As Palestinians lost more land under Oslo, Israel gained many new vital allies in Africa and all over the world. Yet, Israel's full-fledged scramble for Africa as a political ally, economic partner, and a client for its security and weapons technology didn't fully manifest until recently. On July 5th, 2016, Benjamin Netanyahu kickstarted Israel's scramble for Africa with an historic visit to Kenya, which made him the first Israeli prime minister to visit Africa in the last 50 years. After spending some time in Nairobi, where he attended the Israel-Kenya Economic Forum alongside hundreds of Israeli Kenyan business leaders. He moved on to Uganda, where he met leaders from other African countries, including South Sudan, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. Within the same month, Israel announced the renewal of diplomatic ties between Israel and Guinea. The new Israel strategy flowed from there. More high level visits to Africa and triumphant announcements about new joint economic ventures and investments followed. However, diplomatic and economic efforts to win over Africa soon proved insufficient for Israel's prime minister. So he succumbed to rewriting history to improve Israel's standing on the continent. On June 2017, Netanyahu took part in the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, held in Liberian capital Monrovia. Africa and Israel share a natural affinity, Netanyahu claimed in his speech. We have, in many ways, similar histories. Your nations toiled under foreign rule. You experienced horrific wars and slaughters. This is very much our history. With these words, Netanyahu attempted to not only cover the ugly face of Zionist colonialism and deceive Africans, but also rob Palestinians of their history. Despite Netanyahu's blatant lies about similar histories, Israel's charm offensive in Africa went from success to success. In January this year, for example, Chad, a Muslim majority nation in Central Africa's geostrategically most important country, established economic ties with Israel. As it tried to establish itself as a partner to African nations, Israel did make some contributions that benefited Africans, such as delivering solar, water, agriculture technologies to regions in need. However, these contributions came at a significant cost. When, for example, in December 2016, Senegal co-sponsored UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which condemned the construction of illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank in East Jerusalem, Netanyahu recalled Israel's ambassador to Dakar and swiftly canceled the Mashav drip irrigation projects. The projects had previously been widely promoted as a major part of Israel's contribution to the fight against poverty in Africa. Israel not only used projects like these to punish African nations when they failed to give blind support to Israel in international forums, it also used this new relationship to turn Africa into a new market for its arms sales. African countries such as Chad, Nigeria, Mali, and Nigeria and Cameroon, among others, became clients of Israel's counterterrorism technologies, the same deadly tools that are actively used to suppress Palestinians in their ongoing struggle for freedom. And all this as Israel continues to champion the same racist colonial mindset that enslaved and subjugated Africa for hundreds of years. This fact seems to have escaped African leaders who are lining up to receive Israeli handouts and support in their precarious war on terror. Moreover, barefaced anti-African racism that defines mainstream Israeli politics and society also seems of no consequence to the growing Israel fan club in Africa. Many African governments, including those of Muslim majority nations, are now giving Israel exactly what it wants, a way to break out of its isolation and legitimize its apartheid. Israel is making inroads into the same Islamic world, said Netanyahu during the first visit by an Israeli leader to Chad's capital on January 20th, 2019. We are making history and we are turning Israel into a rising global power. Palestinians and Arabs, of course, share some of the blame in all of this for abandoning their African allies in a fruitless chase after Western U.S. Promises of a peace that never actualized. Arab politics have massively shifted since the mid-1970s. Not only are Arab countries no longer speaking in one voice in thus have no unified strategy regarding Africa or anywhere else. But some Arab governments are effectively plotting with Tel Aviv and Washington against Palestinians. The Bahrainian Economic Conference held in Manama on June 25th to the 26th was the latest case in point. The Palestinian leadership has it's shifted its political focus away from the global south, especially since the signing of the Oslo Accords. For decades, Africa mattered little in the limited and self-serving calculations of the Palestinian Authority. For the Palestinian Authority, only Washington, London, and Madrid, Oslo, and Paris carried any geopolitical importance, a deplorable political blunder on all accounts. But this historical mistake must be remedied before Israel's success story denies Palestinians any leverage in Africa and throughout the rest of the global south. Yet, despite its many successes in luring African countries to its web of allies, Israel has failed to tap into the hearts of ordinary Africans who still view the Palestinian fight for justice and freedom as an extension of their own democracy, equality, and human rights. True, Israel has won support of some of Africa's ruling classes, but it has failed to win the African people who remain on the side of Palestinians. Throughout my 10-day visit to their country, Kenyans from all walks of life showed me their support in Palestine, for Palestine in most uplifting, authentic, and natural ways. In Nairobi, students and academics and human rights activists relate to the Palestinian people not as a sympathetic outside observers of their struggle, but as their partners in a collective battle for justice, freedom, and rights. Kenya's bloody fight against British colonialism, its proud liberation war, and its numerous sacrifices to win its freedom are almost a mirror image of ongoing Palestinian struggle against another colonial and racist enemy. Palestine will always be close to the heart of the Africans because of the painful, proud history of colonialism and resistance that we share. With that in mind, Palestinians should wake up to the fact that Israel is actively trying to rewrite their history and deprive them of the solidarity of peoples that perhaps understand their plight much better than most. This would be a moral injustice that must not be allowed to prevail. Interesting. Yeah, Andy, I agree with you. It is unbelievable the amount of influence this tiny nation has. The funny part is that Israel is killing and jailing the true Felicia black Jews. This is very true. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. The continent has an identity crisis and a perception crisis. The identity issue is that they don't want to be who they are. They want to be more like everybody else. And then per uh, the perception issue or the peripheral issue is that they see them. They don't see the plight of colonialism for whatever reason. They seem to use that to get themselves into office, and kind of like the civil rights movement in the United States. They'll always say, "Oh, yeah, my great grandfather," and I was going to say great, but my grandfather doesn't, you know, um, he was a part of the ANC. He did this, and he helped fight against, the colonialists and this, and that. And then when they get into power, they work with colonialists outside of the continent. It's a very strange perception that they seem to have, and it's kind of a nod, wink, wink that they seem to be pushing. Yeah, you're right, Andy. The media doesn't talk about it, mostly because it's controlled by the very people that don't want you talking about it. In my opinion, they're cowards, big cowards, and they should be. It is hypocrisy, but the problem is it doesn't speak for everybody on the ground, right? So, John Lewis in on Capitol Hill or in Washington D.C. doesn't speak for many of the people in ADOS. They do have very good intelligence service. Mossad is actually pretty good, on the highest ranking in intelligence. But the problem is, um, they are preying on the poverty of other people on the continent in order to actually advance their own agenda. Because as they showed in Senegal, um, when Senegalese people actually voted against Israel's or the bill on the table, Israel took back all of their goods. A bunch of Indian givers, for that matter. I have not covered that, Paul. Yeah, I haven't covered it yet. I probably cover it at the end though. I doubt that they would I doubt that they would behead them because they're more valuable alive than they are dead or beheaded for that matter. They might take a few fingers off, but I doubt if they'll behead them. All right, let me get to this next article. Share my screen. Yeah, they don't really gain much by chopping somebody's head off, especially from the CIA. I mean, if they're intelligence operatives, then they're probably more valuable alive than they are dead. All right, this one is from CNBC.com. Africa could be about to benefit from dovish policy shifts in the U.S., experts predict. Cent- Central bankers, central bankers across Africa are paying special attention to the noises coming out of the U.S. Federal Reserve as they mull impending calls on monetary policy easing. On Thursday, the South African Reserve Bank announced its first cut to interest rates in over a year, lowering rates by 25 basis points to 6.5% as the continent's most industrialized economy tackles low inflation in its starkest contraction over a decade in the first quarter. Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Angola will all set rates this week. Nigeria recently passed measures compelling banks to boost lending while a drought in Kenya drove up inflation. Monetary policy in Africa has been held hostage to the Fed hiking cycle for the past 18 months, with African central banks maintaining nominally high domestic interest rates to protect their currencies against capital outflows, despite an improving inflation outlook. European Executive Director and International Builder and European Executive Director and International Brokerage Network, Arabah Grayson, told CNBC. The policy is working as 2018 was the first year since 2015, when African currencies were essentially a flat vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar to relative to annual depreciation about 10% over the previous 4 years, she added. When the Fed's tightens policy for an extended period, it tends to lower demand for traditional U.S.-based safe haven assets, sending investors searching for return elsewhere. This often facilitates a windfall for emerging markets and causes central banks to mirror Fed measures to stabilize supply chains and demand. The recent shift to a more dovish tone from the Fed has allowed African central banks to begin a cautious easing of their domestic monetary stances. With rates cut so far this year in Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and Malawi, Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee on Friday voted to maintain its current policy rate of 16%. Thus far, these have been within the 50 to 100 basis point range. Through the inflation generally on the side, De Wilder suggested that further easing of monetary policy could be due this year, with all are due to vote on rates before the U.S. Central Bank makes its decision on July 31st. The Fed's dovish stance might lessen pressure on tightening and provide room for easing. As rates trend downwards, we are likely to see domestic institutions shift back towards the higher equity allocations and underpin a re-rating of the market, De Wilder said. So this is actually a plus sign for the continent, because as U.S. policies adjust, sub-Saharan African countries are going to benefit from it. So as it stands right now, I think this might just be a short-term euphoria that they may receive, but anything is better than nothing, in my opinion. Bluetooth Tone says, I recently saw a few videos of Israelis demolishing Palestinian homes. Very interesting. Yeah, illegal settlements is a common thing for Israel. So All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from Forbes.com. Russia's secret intelligence agency hacked largest data breach in its history. Red faces in Moscow this weekend with the news that hackers have successfully targeted FSB, Russia's Federal Security Service. The hackers managed to steal 7.5 terabytes of data from a major contractor, exposing secret FSB projects to de-anonymize Tor browsing, scrape social media, and help the state split its internet off from the rest of the world. The data was passed to mainstream media outlets for publishing. FSB is Russia's primary security agency with parallels with the FBI MI5, but its remit um, stretches beyond domestic intelligence to include electronic surveillance overseas and significant intelligence gathering oversight. It is the prime successor agency to the infamous KGB, reporting directly to the Russian president. A week ago, on July 13th, a hacking group under the name of uh, Overrule, over Russ, I think that's what it is, that had reportedly breached SciTech, a major FSB contractor working on a range of live and exploratory internet projects, left a smiling Yoba face on SciTech's homepage alongside pictures purporting to showcase the breach. The hacker group had passed the data itself to the larger hacking group, Digital Revolution, which shared the files with various media outlets and the headlines with Twitter taunting FSB that the agency should maybe rename one of its breach activities Project Colanda. I received a link to Digital Revolution site where an initial tranche of breach documents was published 2 months ago as part of that 7.5 terabytes. I won't publish the link here for obvious reasons. Digital Revolution has targeted FSB before. It is unknown how tightly the two hacking groups are linked. This is very interesting because someone who works in cybersecurity, I'll say this: the problem. 7.5 terabytes is a lot of data. You don't just move that data without somebody actually seeing that there's a high volume of traffic moving on your network. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so the point that I was making was that move 7.5 terabytes of data, somebody is bound to see that coming. Um, because what happens with networks and network monitoring is that when there's a large spike of data being moved or any sort of bandwidth being exceeded above a certain threshold, that gets a lot of alarms start going off on your network monitoring tools. These are either predefined by whatever routing and switching gear that you have, or by your SIM, which is a security incident and event manager. that will monitor all of this traffic. If you have indicators already set up, either they're customized rules or predefined rules, something is going to set off an alarm. And if they're telling me that you moved 7.5 terabytes of data and no one noticed it, there is a lot more going on there, or somebody's lying. Yeah, it's true. So maybe the Russians, maybe the Russians did. Maybe it did not happen, and the Russians are kind of using this to say, yeah, we got hacked. Maybe they hacked themselves. I just find that to be weird. Yeah, that's what the article says, Bull Tone. They're pushing for their own internet. That's what was a part of the breach. See, this is the issue though. If you move 1 gig of data on any sort of network, that's going to raise an alarm. You move 7 terabytes of data and no one noticed it? I don't know, man. Something's not right about this. Unless they kind of did a drip, and drip, right? So a drip would be they took a few megabytes here, a few kilobytes there, and kind of siphon it off. But in order for you to move 7 terabytes of data by dripping, that would take you months, if not a whole year. It'd be impossible for you to move that sort of data at such a slow rate, unless they went about it from different ways. I find that hard to believe that they got 7.5 terabytes of data out of a network and no one knew. Yeah, you're right, Ronan. A YouTube video, I think like maybe maybe an hour long video on YouTube would be something like a gigabyte. Maybe a few hours of YouTube video will be like a gigabyte. But the problem is, what happens when that data moves through your network and no one is there? The alarms start going off. It's impossible for that much data to travel across your network, exfil out, and no one knows about it. Maybe they got a see what happens when you're dealing with bad guys from a nation state perspective. They're very crafty, and they're not doing this just one guy at a time. This is like a multi-man team. Multi-man team. So what happened? Yeah, Ronan, you might be right. Inside a threat. It's a multi-man team. So if you're running a state-run operation, then what happens here is that data, the breaking point is done by one guy. The second um, um, commit to get in is done by another guy, and another guy, the third guy comes in and starts looking for data after the second guy breaches all of your IAM systems, your identity access management systems. Then the third guy goes into the network and starts searching for data, and then fourth guy lifts the data out, and fifth guy processes that data. Those other guys, it gives them other guys time to get out of the network and close up their the evidence. Yeah, bandwidth alone. So I just find that to be very interesting. All right, let me get to the next article. All right, this one is from Bloomberg.com. U.S. targeting of Chinese scientists fuels a brain drain. Chinese scientists startup fled the U.S. after a federal investigation that included a failed sting, airport stops, and unfounded child porn search. It's interesting. I'll just read this caption because I don't think we're going to be able to get through this article. It's behind a paywall. It was a big opportunity for small research university. In 2013, Jin Zhao, a prize-winning PhD from the College of William and Mary, landed venture funding to commercialize some of the school's patented nanotechnology. Zhao's startup rented space nearby, hired local graduates, and agreed to fund $1 million of new research at the Williamsburg, Virginia campus. It was what everyone wants to see, a success story of university spinout, says Jason McDevitt, the school's director of technology transfer. Let me see if I can get behind the paywall. All right, let me fire this up. 6 years later, Yixin Technology Development Limited is up and running, but not in Virginia. The company's R&D and new patent registrations, the lifeblood of any technology startup, has moved to China. The planned William and Mary spinout left the U.S. after federal agents hounded its founder, Zhao, for 2 years, and prosecutors accused him of trying to smuggle a robotic arm from Florida to a university in China that U.S. officials had linked to the nation's top nuclear weapons lab. The charges were dismissed in December 2017, but Zhao, shaken by the ordeal, gave up his U.S. research operations. The 44-year-old applied physicist struggled to clear his name, uh, extricate himself from a persistent undercover sting, and overcome a 2016 arrest. Shows how America's heightening Cold War with China presents risk for ethnic Chinese scientists working in the U.S. He's among a growing number who are leaving behind their families and taking their skills and business opportunities to where else? China. My dream was defeated, says Zhao, whose crew cut and boyish face uh, belied the brash candor with which he tells his story. I came here for freedom and security. Now fear is pushing us back to China. A spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, which led the investigation, disputed any suggestion that the government was unfair to Zhao, noting that he agreed to enter a pretrial division program, which included performing 30 hours of community service. It's rare for federal prosecutors to offer diversion in felony cases like Zhao's, but in many respects, his case resembles a paperwork problem that got way out of hand. China tops the list of nations sending people to study at U.S. universities. Here are the top 10 by percentage share of international student population in 2018. China at 33%, India at 18%, South Korea at 5%, Saudi Arabia at 4%. That's new. Canada at 2%, Japan at 2%, Taiwan at 2%, Vietnam at 2%, Brazil at 1%, Mexico at 1%, and all the countries combined is 30%. Like tens of thousands of China's best and brightest, Zhao came to the U.S. to earn his doctorate and settle down as a permanent U.S. resident. But his plan to monetize his inventions by combining American entrepreneurship with Chinese capital and manufacturing became a casualty of intense scrutiny U.S. law enforcement officials applying to Chinese scientists. Over the past decade, concern has grown steadily in Washington that China seems determined to steal its way to up to the economic ladder at our expense, as FBI Director Christopher Wray put it in an April speech. While the basis for that concern, China's efforts to promote U.S. innovation and know-how is well documented, the response has been sweeping. Agencies across the federal government have mobilized against potential Chinese industrial spies, warning companies and universities and anyone else with intellectual property to be particularly vigilant when dealing with Chinese business partners and employees who might be what Ray calls non-traditional information collectors. The National Institutes of Health is even cracking down on biomedical researchers with undisclosed ties to China at such organizations, and the renowned MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Zhao's return to China fits an emerging pattern among targeted Chinese scientists and engineers, says Jeremy Wu, a retired federal government statistician and board member of the Committee of 100, a Chinese American civic group. The net effect, we are pushing top talent away, he says. At what cost? The joke in Silicon Valley is that if the feds, in the name of protecting intellectual property, deter Chinese researchers from working in the U.S., there won't be any intellectual property to protect, says Frank Wu, a law professor at UC Hastings in San Francisco and president of the Committee of 100. Like the 2004 film A Day Without a Mexican, which depicts California's economy grinding to a halt from the sudden disappearance of Latino workers. A significant brain drain of Chinese experts could decimate many of America's most celebrated enterprises. That's interesting. Didn't a Chinese professor in the U.S. steal military documents? They were saying 200 years in prison. Yeah, he tried to well, whether he sent them or not, I don't know. But anti-gravity, he was able to collect those documents, and I'm pretty sure he sent them to China already. Those things are long gone. What happens, anti-gravity, is that it's not like you stick them on a USB thumb drive and then you send them, via mail or something like that. No, that stuff gets lifted from a hard drive or some storage location, and then it gets put into a file share, and then they push it, to another file share, and then so on and so forth until they get to its destination. In that case, I don't know how far it got, but I'm pretty sure that it it made its way to China. Yeah, yeah. Oh man, it's sort of like the cloud, but it's not exactly the cloud. The cloud is actually it's actually a service for infrastructure as a service. In this regard, it probably would not be that, but they did. I get your point though. What's funny about the guy in the picture? He actually looks like Scholar Chang. Who's part of our hangouts. You know what, Christopher Clipper? That's a point that a lot of people have made, and unfortunately, the racism and institutional discrimination that America has for melanated people has blinded them from this. If you look through history and you see what kind of contributions that educated black people made, men and women, especially men, um, you could have replicated that sort of effect on a massive scale, but they opted not to. I know some people will say that black people should have worked harder, but the black people have been working hard since slavery. Much more harder do you want them to work? All right, this one is from CNBC.com. China warns of war in case of move towards Taiwan independence. China's defense ministry warned on Wednesday that it was ready for the war if there was a move towards Taiwan's independence, accusing the United States of undermining global stability and denouncing its arms sales to the self ruled island. This month, the Pentagon said the U.S. State Department had approved sales of weapons requested by Taiwan, including tanks and Stinger missiles estimated to be worth about $2.2 billion. China responded by saying it would impose sanctions on U.S. firms involved in such a deal. China would make its China would make its greatest effort for peaceful reunification. Defense Ministry spokesman Wu, Wu Quinn said. However, we must firmly point out that seeking Taiwan independence is a dead end. Wu told a news briefing on a national defense white paper, the first in several years, to outline the strategy, the military strategic concerns. If there are people who dare to try and split Taiwan from the country, China's military will be ready to go to war firmly to firmly safeguard national sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. He said. The United States is the main arms supplier to Taiwan, which China deems a wayward province. Beijing has never re-announced the use of the force to bring the island under its control. Washington has no formal ties with democratic Taiwan, but is bound by law to help provide it with the means to defend itself. The Chinese defense document said the United States had provoked intensified competition among major countries, significantly increased its defense expenditure and undermined global strategic stability. China's defense spending would maintain moderate and steady growth, but it was relatively low compared to other major countries. It added, there is still a wide gap between China's defense expenditure and the requirements for safeguarding national sovereignty, security, and development interests. It said reports of reports of a secret pact with Cambodia granting China's armed forces exclusive access to the part of Southeast Asia's nation's Ream naval base on the Gulf of Thailand were not in accordance with the facts. Wu added. China and Cambodia have in the past carried out positive exchanges in cooperation on military drills, personal training, and logistics, he said. This kind of cooperation does not target any third party. This is very interesting because um, Dolly, you can come on if you want to. Let me send you the link. Yeah, this is interesting because now you, if China allegedly has the largest military on the planet with 2 million soldiers ready to go within the country itself, you're starting to take into consideration that um, Cambodia and North Korea. You can throw North Korea in there as well. North Korea would fight if they have to, and then you take into consideration Mongolia and many of the other regional states would come to China's defense if they have to. I know I don't think Vietnam, Andy. I don't think Vietnam's going to come to the defense of China anytime soon. They naturally do not like each other. It's one of those things. But if you're talking about, you know, Cambodia, Laos, um, and a few of the other countries in the region, there's a high probability you're going to be dealing with a lot more than just 2 million, soldiers. You're probably be dealing with like 4 million or so. That's a lot of people. Yeah, anti-gravity. The beef actually goes way, way back before the 1970s. 1979 was the last time that China actually got themselves into a physical war. They haven't had a war since then. Although they've had skirmishes in Africa, they got their asses handed to them in Africa. Yeah, they're no match for the Africans. The Africans actually handed them to the ass in 2016 in the Red Sea operations. They don't talk about it much, but that was a bloody fight that the Chinese had to put up with. They got their asses handed to them. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective that they would rely on ASEAN states to actually come and back up China in case there is a fight. But Taiwan, on the other hand, I don't know how long Taiwan could actually hold out for. All China has to do is cut off their shipping lanes, and it's game over for them. No, that Vietnam will never come together with China. Not in the military perspective. That will never happen. Vietnam is a regional power themselves, so they have very little interest in aligning themselves with their neighbors to the north. They live in a bad neighborhood for all intents and purposes. Remember, Vietnam can not only defend itself; it could fight off bigger powers very, very easily. They defeated the United States. They've beaten the Chinese. Um, all in one swoop. You haven't seen anything like that since the Israelis defeated the Arabs in the 1967 war. It's actually a good case study for from a diplomatic standpoint for um, for people who claim ADOS, right? People who claim to be Black Americans. It's actually something to pay attention to, because from a military standpoint, that's something that ADOS people could actually take into consideration for future operations. As long as you get the from an asymmetric warfare standpoint, as long as you get the upper hand, um, you'll win that fight. That's right, Christopher Clipper. They defeated the French. But then again, the French doesn't win any wars anyways. The French hasn't won the war in God knows how long. Yeah, that's a good point, anti-gravity, because you hold them off for 7 days, but even if you did hold them off for 7 days, um, that's a strategy. But does the strategy actually work? Right? Is it actually effective? Um, America needs um, at least 30 days to bring in a whole entire division into a war zone. They need at least a month to get their guys into a war zone, a whole division of people, if not more. Um, for Taiwan, how long can you hold out for? You're gonna have to you're gonna have to accept that you're gonna take a lot of casualties, putting guys on the front line. So maybe that's why Taiwan has all these tanks. I'm pretty sure these tanks have these naval naval objectives behind them, right? The ability to take two dozen tanks, if not more tanks, and fire them fire them at ships into the ocean, and then scoot and run away behind a mountain, because there's a mountain inside Taiwan um, that is massive in size, and kind of blocks off um, radar penetrating into the country itself, and then it's a good strategic location for the Taiwanese military to hide behind, as well as your tanks to come out, fire off, 1,000 rounds into the ocean, projectiles into the ocean, and then scoop back out, and then the next wave of tanks come in, and then continuously fires, and they reload, and so on and so forth. That would be a bloody war. That would be a bloody war. That the Taiwanese would be pretty well dug in, and the Chinese would have to go in there on foot. They can never carpet bomb the country, because the aerial defense systems would shoot down everything that comes into its lethal zones. It won't be easy at all. I mean, you would have to send guys in. The Chinese would have to send in guys by either airdropping them, or have those guys physically swim across that strait, the Taiwanese Strait. And I say that because if you try to put a landing ship in that area, those things would get knocked out immediately. Either you hit a sea mine, or um, some kind of coastal battery system just takes them all out. It would be bloody, man. It would be very bloody, and it may not even be worth it at the end of the day. I don't think the Chinese are willing to sacrifice 100,000 guys. Well, I shouldn't say 100,000. you'll probably have 100,000 injured. I can tell you that much if they're not dead. Um, every wave that goes in on a landing ship would be decimated as soon as they hit the beach. All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from CNN.com. Warplanes from 4 countries face off in Asian confrontation. Warplanes from 4 countries faced off Tuesday in a chaotic and unprecedented confrontation above a small disputed island off the coast of South Korea and Japan. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a statement claiming that they fired more than 300 warning shots at a Russian A-50 command and control military aircraft early Tuesday morning after it had twice violated the country's airspace, the first such incident between the countries. Moscow furiously denied Seoul's account of the encounter, claiming that the South Korean military jets had dangerously intercepted 2 of its bombers, including plane, a planned flight over neutral waters. But in a statement Tuesday afternoon, Japan's Ministry of Defense backed up South Korea's claim, saying the A-50 had flown over the islands and that Tokyo had to scramble fighters to intercept. A further complication, both South Korea and Japan said that the 2 Chinese H-6 bombers had joined Russian military aircraft on sorties through the region as well. The confrontation took place over disputed islands in the East Sea, also known as the Sea of Japan, in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The 2 small islands, known to the Koreans as Dokdo and to the Japanese as Takashima, I thought it said Takashi 69, but I must be getting tired, are claimed by both countries. What triggers the confrontation or why the planes were in the region is unclear, but analysts said the mission may have been disguised by Russia to draw out South Korea and Japanese aircraft for intelligence gathering purposes. The mission will have given them a comprehensive map of the South Korean National Air Defense System, said Peter Layton, a former Royal Australian Air Force pilot and analyst at the Griffith Asia Institute. So this is a map of where the AWACS had flew and the South Korea and Japanese military intercepted them. I know what the A-50 aircraft look like for Russia and the Tu-95 aircraft. I know what those look like, but I don't know what the A-6 actually looks like. I'll probably look it up in a few seconds. So what we're seeing here is that let me move my mouse. What we're seeing here is that the Chinese H-6 aircraft, 2 of them, one here and the other here, plus the Tupolev 95 Big Bear aircraft, both ran parallel with each other. It came up through the straits in between South Korea and Japan over these small islands, and it looks like South Korean and Japanese aircraft, or at least South Korean aircraft, anti-aircraft battery fired some shots at it, which is very crazy. The, the incident came during what South Korean officials have claimed was a joint Russian-Chinese military uh, exercise. According to South Korea, the two Chinese H-6 bombers passed into Seoul's air defense identification zone beginning at 6:44 a.m., joined by two Russian Tu-95 strategic bombers. The four planes then entered the Cadiz together at about 8:40 a.m. and remained there for 24 minutes. Airspace is defined as the area 12 nautical miles from the country's borders, which falls entirely under its control. And ADs is an area in which the controlling country demands identification, location, and control of aircraft's direction, but doesn't necessarily have any rights of engagement under international law. So this is a more detailed map of the ADs, the Air Defense Identification Zone of Japan, China, and South Korea. You know, this map doesn't really show it, but Russia is actually right here. It's actually very, very close. South Korea's Cadiz was first established in 1950 and most recently adjusted by Seoul in 2013. After the Cadiz flyover, Seoul said a Russian A-50 flew above the contested islands first at 9:09 a.m. local time and then again at 9:33 a.m., each time just for a matter of minutes. In response, South Korea deployed F-15F and KF-16 fighter jets, the statement said, and fired 360 warning shots ahead of the Russian aircraft, 80 during the first violation and 280 during the second. The shots were fired using 20 millimeter weapons, according to the country's Ministry of Defense. The South Korean military said that say they also sent 30 warnings to the Russian plane but received no response. The A-50 is an unarmed AWACS plane, standing for Airborne Warning and Control System, designed for tracking and observation. That's a picture of the plane right there. In a statement on Tuesday afternoon, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed its aircraft had taken part in a joint patrol with the Chinese long range aircraft and said that they were conducting the first joint air patrol using long range aircraft in the Asian Pacific region. The statement said that the two Russian Tu-95 bombers had two Chinese A-6 bombers had conducted an air patrol over the waters of Japan in the East China Seas. That's a picture of the Tu-95 Bear, the Russian Bear. This plane was built in the 1950s and it still works just fine to this very day. They changed out the analog to digital electronics on the inside, I think, back in the 2000s. Yeah, I think in the 2000s, and it functions just like any other regular plane, except that it's noisy as crap. Oh, okay. Here's the Chinese H-6 strategic bomber here. Yeah, so this is interesting. I want to go back to the map real quick because I think it's interesting here because Okinawa is not that far away in this picture. I can't really zoom in on it, but they're accounting for 250 miles between China and Japan. Um, and I think it's half that between South Korea and Japan. So if a fight was to break out between the Americans and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, then what would happen here is they're mapping all this stuff out and they have the ability to respond. Um, I don't know if the Americans have that ability. Yeah, bullet tooth tone. Most of the time, that's what those bombers are there for. It is for carrying strategic weapons. They're long range weapons, right? So your nuclear cruise missiles. I believe those ones can carry 12, if I remember correctly. If it's not 8, it's about 12 cruise missiles. I think the other one, the Tu-222, strategic bomber, can carry up to 16, if I remember correctly. Well, if there's going to be a fight, it's going to be in the Pacific. It's not going to be in Russia's backyard. So, U.S. military complains Venezuela jet aggressively shadowed its spy plane. Blames Russia. Interesting. A Venezuela Su-30 fighter aggressively shadowed an American spy plane over the Caribbean Sea, the U.S. military said, claiming that the jet was at an unsafe distance and blaming Russia for its irresponsible support for Caracas. Footage of the Russian made Su 30 aircraft approaching a U.S. EP 3 reconnaissance plane was released by the Southern Command on Sunday. The U.S. military said the incident took place over the Caribbean Sea on July 19th, but did not indicate how close the EP 3 was to Venezuelan border, stating that the planes were in international airspace. The actions of the Venezuelan plane were jeopardizing to the U.S. aircraft and its crew, Southern Command said, claiming it was an unsafe distance. The Su-30 does not seem to have any visible weaponry. However, planes of the type usually come fitted with an internal autocannon. The tweet comes after Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino accused the U.S. spy plane of entering the flight information region, Marquetia, controlled by the country without our authorization. This violated the rules of the International Civil Aviation Organization and constituted an aeronautical risk for other aircraft, Pedrino said. Brief footage showing the U.S. spy plane apparently captured from the Su-30 was released by Venezuela. Since the Venezuelan plane was Russian made, the U.S. military did not hesitate to blame its foreign bogeyman, Moscow, for the incident. It's proof of Russia's responsible or irresponsible military support for the Venezuelan government, as well as President Nicolas Maduro's undermining of efforts to counter illicit trafficking, the military said. Russian Su-30s were purchased by Caracas in the mid 2000s in the Hugo Chavez era. Amid ongoing back attempts to oust Maduro and install self-styled Eritrean President Juan Guaido, Washington has repeatedly called upon Moscow to stop its cooperation with Venezuela and get out of the country. Russia says the cooperation, which is in compliance with all international rules, is only set to expand. This is interesting. Um, I think an Su-30 is a multi-role fighter, similar to the MiG. You know, it's interesting that there's a spy plane going over, close to my airspace or 12 nautical miles off, whatever the international um, recognized rule is. There's this idea that they have a right to spy on you, but you shouldn't have a right to actually defend your airspace. I find it to be very interesting that they take that position. And we are at the end of the hangout. I don't see Thaya on here, so I'll give up until 10:45, and then we'll just close out. Yeah, that's right, Bluetooth Tone. The Su-30 is a good plane, and it's easy to work on. I think it's the equivalent of maybe a F-16 D frame, I think, or yeah, it might be a C frame or E frame of the F-16. Might be the equivalent of that. I think a Su-34 or Su-35 is the equivalent of a F-22. Christian says, so you want to talk about Nisby? Not on geopolitics. I won't be talking about that. Not tonight. But yeah, the fact that Venezuela has an S-300 system and has an Su-30 system, 30 Su-30 fighter jet, and they have S-200 and also Pent. I think they have a book missile system. If I remember correctly, they have the book missile system. But the point of the matter here is that Venezuela's air defense capabilities are top notch. The idea that you're going to fly your spy plane in there and think that they're not going to see that, shows the lunacy of how far you're willing to go. We saw this just play out over just over China, the South Korea and Japan, and China and Russia flying their planes, though they're not lethal, flying their planes into these areas, knowing that there's a probability that they could be shot down. Um, but when they do it, it's bad. But when the United States does it, it's they're aggressively following me, while I'm spying on them. I mean, imagine if a guy goes into like a woman's bathroom, restroom for that matter, and he says, "Oh, well, you're aggressively following me while I'm in an environment that I'm not wanted in, and I'm not supposed to be in here anyways." Yeah, good looking out, Chris. Yeah, it's crazy the sort of a reaction that they have, against another country trying to determine its own sovereignty, right? It's trying to protect its own sovereignty, and you're telling them that they don't have any sovereignty. Um, we'll do what we want over your country. We're gonna spy, use our planes to spy on you, within reasonable distance, and then are completely befuddled at the idea that an advanced fighter jet is following you now. If you're a black person, if you're ADOS, you've been into retail stores, big retail chain stores, and what happens? You get followed around the store. You don't hear African Americans complaining about being followed aggressively through the store. He followed me down, aisle 9, and it was a blue light special down there, and he wouldn't let me get to it. He was being aggressive with me. No, we can never use that excuse. We can never use that excuse. It just seems interesting that I'm gonna fly my my spy planes into your country's airspace, and if you do anything to stop it, that's the declaration of war. That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. Because the United States would never tolerate Venezuelan, because I think they use a Hercules, if I remember correctly. I think they use a Hercules. It's a Boeing plane. Um, they would never allow Venezuelan military or Mexican military for that matter to fly an AWAC over the southwestern border of the United States, over Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, to stop the bad guys, to look out for terrorists. No one would ever tolerate that in Washington D.C. or even on the ground. They wouldn't tolerate that. But they seem to have this idea that everybody else has to tolerate what they say so. So yeah, my perspective on this is that they don't even need to do San Diego anti gravity. They can do that to Puerto Rico. Imagine if Venezuelan Su-30 fighter jets were cruising over Puerto Rico. You really think that the United States tolerate that? I don't think so. Yeah, but the difference here, bro, genius, is that if they did fly a drone over your backyard, you don't have any sort of aerial property. There is no aerial property in that regard. I mean, it can fly over your yard if it wants to. As long as it doesn't land on your property, then it's good. But that's just me, though. Yeah, Bluetooth tone. The Air Force will not admit that Russian planes compete. They have tons of videos of this high risk flying around U.S. assets. Yeah, I mean, if you're Russia, you have to be sharp in those areas, right? You have to be able to compete on an asymmetric level. Yeah, the MiG is a very interesting product, but Sukhoi became the default go-to plane, for the Russian Federation for all intents and purposes. The MiG does have a new plane coming out that's autonomous. Basically, it's a batwing sort of hypersonic plane. But the point that I'm making here is that I agree with you, Paul. Those are great platforms and can learn a lot. I remember, a year or so ago, before we started the Black Brain Trust, I was looking at plane auctions. Basically, they have these random sort of planes that go up for auction, and then they had a MiG 21 fighter jet. Very interesting. It was a yeah, it was a MiG. It was a MiG 21. Not sure who owned it at what point, but it was part of the Soviet era. And what happened here was that someone ended up paying 500 grand for that plane. Typically, a fighter jet will go anywhere between 5 million to up to $100 million. The F-35 is close to 100 million. I say all that to say that the auctioning off of a MiG 21 that still can fly just without the weapons. It's amazing to be able to own one of those things. I would greatly pay, um, 90, not 90, $500,000 for a fighter jet like that. Where are you going to get that from for that kind of price? I mean, you probably have to make your own armaments and stuff like that, but who cares? Yeah, the thrust vectoring of the F-22 and the Harrier jump plane came from um, the Yuck 141. Let me bring that up. I think that's yeah, the Yuck 141 or Yak. Sorry, the term the Russian term is actually called Yak. All right, this is a Soviet era Yak 141 that Paul's referring to that they stole the technology from. This plane was ahead of its time. This was in the 1970s, 1976. Yeah, and that's exactly what Paul's referring to. So the vertical takeoff and landing. What the Russians did with this, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure they discontinued it, but they do make a Yak 131. Actually, a neat little plane. Amazing. Yeah, so planes find their service, for long intervals throughout time. So you really don't replace planes all that much if you're the military, nor do you replace tanks. You kind of just update them as they go along. When you think about the T-55, the Russian battle tank that's used in Syria, um, that tank is probably about 55, 60 years old, easy, and it still works. But that's the thought process of a person in that caliber. Yeah, you're right. Blue Two Tone, they're not that hard to fly. Um, I think it requires like half the time to learn how to fly a MiG-21 in comparison to a F-16 or F-15. Yeah, T-55 tanks, man, were pretty solid when at the time that they were developed. But when you're going up against bad guys with towels wrapped around their heads on the back of Toyota pickup trucks that do about 100 miles an hour, from 0 to 60 in about 7 to 8 seconds, that's kind of hard for a tank to move around that much. A tank needs at least 30 seconds, just to move its just to move its treads. So a lot of those tanks were taken out by ATGMs and by the terrorists. All right, I'm gonna get out of here because Thalia didn't come on like she was supposed to. Rainy Woman's not around. No one's been on the panel with me. I've been solo for tonight. I got through everything before 11 o'clock. So, yeah, Boris Johnson is the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Good for him. I guess he's supposed to be their version of Trump, with his hair and his rambunctiousness. Um, so good for them. I would have brought up the, Ilhan Omar controversy with Trump, about going back to your own country and whether or not maybe black people should rethink this whole entire go back to Africa thing. I mean, he told a Somali woman to go back to her own country after she escaped it because the United States bombed it in the first place. Yeah, if you all haven't hit the like button already, man, hit the like button, man, and share the video and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust when we do have things posted in the community tab. I need to start posting some more stuff in there before August 1st. We've been slacking. I think Ayanna Presley, I think she is supposed to be Haitian, if I remember correctly. Or at least she's born to Haitian parents. Anyways, I'm out of here, man. Peace.